Okay, so here's a question. Can you all hear me? Okay, so you can hear me. You're not going to be able to hear Howard. Give me a second to figure this out.
Oh,
Yeah. Can you hear Howard?
this is Howard talking.
Okay. I don't think they can hear you. I think they can only hear me. Oh, you can hear Howard. Oh, that's so weird. I bet you're hearing Howard through my microphone and not actually. So, hello everyone. Let me try that again. This will be exciting. We'll try to cut some of this off later, but
let me do this test real quick.
I'm not hearing that actually.
You're not hearing that?
No, I think.
Hang on. It might. It's wrong.
I mean, I hear you. So just to explain to
Zoom picked the wrong microphone. Zoom picked the mic that was on my camera, but now I have this mic selected.
Okay.
Does this go thump, thump, thump for you?
Still no. But they can hear you. So I'm going to explain what's going on for the people who are watching this live, and then we're going to edit this part out for the piece that hangs out on the internet, because we have that technology. For the first time, we are doing this in a live Zoom room. And so you're getting to see an exciting experiment where our Patreon supporters are actually in the room with us. But essentially the way I have to do this is by sharing my screen into StreamYard. So we are learning exciting things now. Okay. Right. We're going to cut that part, which I bet you didn't know you could do with a live stream, but here we go. Hello, and welcome to the Q&A with Writing Excuses. My name is Mary Robinette Kowal.
I'm Howard Taylor.
And we're two of the hosts of Writing Excuses. So the way this works is that our Patreon supporters have submitted questions to us that we're going to answer. They're also in the Zoom room with us so that if they have any follow-up questions, they can ask it just right in the moment. And this is pretty exciting for us. We love actually having some of this real-time interaction, because when we record the podcast, we don't.
To put it differently, talking with people is much more fun than talking at people.
Yeah. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can, and you're watching this live, you can hop over to patreon.com/writingexcuses. And the link to join the Zoom is right there. You can hop right on in after you become a supporting member, of course. All right. So I'm going to start with the first question and kind of going to summarize it just a little bit. Do you have opinions about writers' assistant tools such as Grammarly, ProWritingAid, Language Tool, including any concerns about the entities making use of submitted works for AI training? And the person who asked this is not looking for endorsement, but just curious about our thoughts on them as a category, like any cautionary comments and whether we think they're a value add for any writers. So I've been using Grammarly, but I found that I didn't use it for my writing. I was using it for social media because it would flag things and helped me avoid most of the spotting the typo right after I send it out into the world. I largely don't use them now. What about you, Howard? Do you use anything like that?
I use a spell checker, and that is about it.
Yeah.
Years and years of writing the script for the comic and then rewriting it, within an hour or a day, and then putting art on it and publishing it. I edit while I write a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how the writer brain works for me. And so I don't get tripped up as much with the, oh, I did a grammar bad, because I'm going to read it 3 or 4 times before I post it anyway. Do I have concerns about other people using it? Not really, but I've found that a lot of those tools, you can end up defaulting into like business email voice,
Mm-hmm.
and using it for your prose. It can, especially when it makes suggestions about word choice when you're writing dialogue, I would just steer all the way clear from that, because those tools don't know how your character should be talking.
Yeah, I find that that's a similar thing for me, that it's just not, it's just not, it doesn't capture natural speaking. As far as my concern about it stealing stuff to train AI, I do not love that happening without permission. That said, if I could actually train an AI to write a business email for me that was entirely in my voice, I would not mind that, because I hate writing them. But I don't like the idea of it happening without my permission, and I don't like the idea of it stealing other people's work without their permission.
Yeah.
And we have a comment that someone says that they've heard from people with dyslexia or English as a second language that many of these tools are actually quite useful and helpful.
Oh, yeah. And one of the reasons I use a spell checker is that there are words that I will always misspell. And that's the sort of problem that you can have with grammar or with anything, in which case, hey, you break out the assistive technology. Look at this guy who wears glasses and doesn't complain about anybody else wearing or not wearing glasses. Sometimes we need it.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the question of beta readers. This is a question in 3 parts, and I'm breaking them apart. Beta readers, how many do you need? So the person who's been asking says that I've been diligently chatting people up at cons, local book festivals and places like that, and they have about 3 to 5 people that they can reasonably expect to finish a book. Is this enough to get a sense for how it's coming along, plus catch any major facepalm moments? My feeling, and Howard, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say, is that for the most part, if you get 3 to 5 people, that's going to cover a lot of ground. But there are some things that you need a specialist reader for. Subject matter experts, whether that is for a lived experience or some technical detail. So that's my caveat. I have significantly more beta readers than that, and there's always something new that I learn when someone chats with me. But at one point, I accidentally, having kind of forgotten that I've published a number of novels, and that if I said, hey, you can beta read for me, that more people would sign up than used to. I wound up with 100 beta readers on a project, and that was too many.
Yeah.
They were all saying it was just a lot of repetition. So you have any thoughts about number?
Yeah, when you're starting out, it's often difficult to know why you want the beta reader.
Mm-hmm.
And that question, because one of the answers to the question, and I'm going to be blunt about this, is validation. You spend a lot of time sitting and writing on your own in an office, and if you've never published anything before, if you don't already have people out there who have read your work, there is this, and I say this because I felt it, there is this sense of desperation. I want somebody to read this and tell me to keep going. Okay. And often in that circumstance, you need one or two beta readers, and they can be your mom. You just need somebody to read and to tell you to keep going. When you reach the point where you really want people to tell you, hey, was this chapter clear? Did it move the plot forward? Did it move the characters forward? Did it answer the questions you have? Once you reach the point where you're ready to technically engage with beta readers, I'd say between 2 and 6, maybe, because after about 6, it gets thick. And Mary Robinette, as you said, once you have 4 people saying the same thing, but you had to read all 4 of those things.
Yeah.
It's a lot for you to wade through. The challenge for me has always been, where do I get the really good beta readers who are part of the target audience? And that's a separate question, I think.
Yeah, and I'll say that that's a really great point, because I've found that I can train most people to give me the kind of feedback that I need, which is why I don't need a ton of beta readers. I think you need a lot more if you don't have them trained. So we've got a couple of episodes about that, about how to train beta readers. I have a YouTube on how to give a critique, basically how to train your internal editor, but also talks about beta reading. And it's basically you train them to give you their symptoms, awesome, boring, confused, and disbelief, instead of like grammar nitpicks. Okay. So still on the beta reader front, is there, you've got a novel. In order to keep people reading, would it be better if I serialize the novel and sent it out in 1 to 2 hour reading chunks every week or so? How do you keep people engaged, besides obviously writing a really good book?
Yes, that's one of the questions, or one of the comments. No, rewinding. I said earlier that I was going to be slow, not because of technical lag, but just because of my brain. What's the word I'm looking for? One of the challenges with our critique group, the critique group that I'm in, is that chapters come in once a week, and we have what we call the long read problem, where a reader will read something and say, "Oh, this feels like it's coming out of nowhere," and the person who submitted the chapter can say, "Actually, I foreshadowed this in this paragraph of text in a submission 3 weeks ago." That's a real challenge. Once beta readers are aware of it, once they are able to say, hey, this might be a long read problem, but I feel like this character action was unjustified, or I feel like whatever. That makes it very easy for the author, for the person who submitted, to say, oh, okay, actually it is a long read problem, but I'm not going to call you out on it. The flip side of that is, if you hand people 40,000 words at a go, or 140,000 words at a go, yes, that is a big ask.
Yeah.
They're more likely to be able to tell you how the work does as a whole without the long read problem, but it's still a really big ask.
Yeah. I effectively serialize my novels because I have people reading along as I go. So I stay about 3 chapters ahead of where my readers are, and send them chapters as I finish them. What winds up happening sometimes, however, is that I will have a really long gap in between when I send chapters out, which means that the readers have had time to forget things, or to lose some interest. So I do have a pretty steep drop off on people who actually finish the novel, which brings us to the next question. Still on beta readers. Is there any way to make it really easy for people to opt out, or more accurately, to let you know that they have opted out, either because it's not their cup of tea or because they ran out of time? I've found that if I tell people, let me know when you stop reading and why, even if you're afraid it's going to hurt my feelings, because that is very useful information for me.
Yep. You can't completely make people comfortable with quitting anything. That is really hard to do. What you can do is front load a bunch of the work and say, well, like, just give me the reason why you stopped, because people stop reading all the time and I need to know. And if you stopped reading for some reason, that's actually super helpful.
Yeah.
And you say it genuinely rather than me saying super helpful in a way that sounds sarcastic. Bless your damn heart.
Yeah, exactly. All right, moving on. So, what do you do when you're writing historical fiction and 100% accurate plot necessary setting detail throws people out of the story consistently? Listen, I feel your pain. Oh my goodness. This is something that anybody who writes historical has had to run into at some point. So in this person's case, they're dealing with swearing, that people seem to believe that they're having a lot of readers who don't understand that we've cursed in basically the same fashion in English for a really long time. And
they're some of our oldest words.
And yeah, and so the problem is that you use language that sounds to a reader like it's modern, and even though it is period correct. So where possible, I do actually pull that out and swap it in for something that has the same feel. One of the best tools that I found was the OED. Oxford English Dictionary has a historical thesaurus. And so you can plug in the word that you're using and then look at synonyms that hit the same kind of feel in terms of the obscenity, but are feel also more antiquated. There's two examples that I have for when I think it's appropriate to change them. I don't think you have to change them all. One is where people can't get past it. For instance, Jane Austen used the word electricity. I cannot when I'm writing a Jane Austen, even though they had, like, electricity was a known thing. It wasn't wiring houses, but people were aware of it. It was a party trick. You used it to shock people. Yeah. So that's one category where it just sounds modern but isn't. And those you can swap out. The other category of sometimes it's best to make a change is when it is has a different historical context than it has a modern context. So if it's carrying a different amount of weight, for instance, I was writing a book set in the 1950s, and there were euphemisms that people would use all the time. For instance, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. If I have a character that's using colored people in 1950, it sounds real different than if I have someone using that in 2024, unless they're saying the entire name of NAACP. And so even though it's historically correct for me to use that, I know that a modern reader is the person who's reading it, and it's going to carry a different emotional weight when I use colored people to refer to a Black person than it would in the period. So I swap those. So that's
I come back to a quote that I heard from Michael Dell 30 plus years ago. Sometimes it is better to change than to be right.
Yeah. There's something.
And that's, for me, that's words to live by.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing when it is better to change than to be right is tricky, but just knowing that is a condition is often all that you need in order to clear the hurdle and to say, oh, you know what? I'm going to have this character swear using, thou whey-faced fool instead of,
the F-bomb.
Else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very, very similar. There's a thing that I've talked about on the podcast at some point. It's called area of intention. That think about what your authorial area of intention is, and then what the character area of intention is. And I know that you say it's 100%, that it's a plot necessary setting detail, but I'm willing to bet a fair bit of money, actually, that you will be able to change that if you think about what the area of intention is. Like, why is the character saying this particular word in this particular moment? And is there another word that will carry the same kind of weight? All right. What does recovering from burnout look like? Over the past 2 years, I've been through many horrors and life upheavals, some of them several times while pushing myself to high levels of productivity. And right now, I just can't do anything. I take naps and stare at the walls. Deadlines send me into a panic. I got myself an excellent psychiatrist and therapist, but what now? And what does financial planning look like for a time like this? Whew, boy. That's it. I am. Okay. I'm having a lot of feels.
Quick caveat here. I am not a therapist. This really depends on what kind of burnout or trauma you're recovering from. And I say trauma because it's not burnout if you burnt out because you were working hard while being traumatized. It's trauma. And that's the sort of thing that a good psychiatrist, a good therapist can help you work through. Those are questions that you're going to need to answer in some way or another. What was it that you were suffering through that you are now trying to recover from? For me, recovery from burnout, and I've burnt myself out dozens of times in the last 2 decades, short-term hard pushes, and then wake up in the morning and realize I can't even. For me, it began with small tasks, which I would sometimes just calendar in as an appointment. Tell myself, okay, look, for 30 minutes, I'm going to do this one thing. And maybe it is edit a short story, or maybe it is just draw a picture so I can have drawn a picture. But starting small. But I want to couch that in a different context real quick. I suffer from long COVID, chronic fatigue. And one of the very, very worst pieces of advice you can give someone who has chronic fatigue is, oh, you just need to exercise a little bit every day. And the answer is no, that is no longer a thing you can safely do. That will actually begin killing muscle tissue. Please just stop. And if you're giving that advice to people, please just be quiet. Chronic fatigue is a special kind of metabolic burnout, for lack of a better term, and I need medical attention from somebody other than a personal trainer. It is entirely possible that the burnout or the trauma that you're recovering from is of that flavor. and sitting down and trying to work will make things worse. Back to the caveat, I'm not a therapist. I don't know, just, from the shape of the question, I've got no idea what the right answer is. I do think I know how to ask some of the right questions to help people find answers, but I'm still not a therapist.
Yeah, I've just I skimmed some of the details of the question because I didn't want to make this person have to live with that for all eternity on the internet, interwebs. But to echo what Howard is saying, it's not so much burnout. You're dealing with an emotional injury. And if you think about it as an injury rather than burnout, you are having to lie around and stare at the wall, in the same way that you would if you'd had a major injury. What I have found myself is that the amount of time it takes to cause the injury, when it's when it's coupled with exhaustion, is comparable to how long it's going to take to recover. So if you think about pulling all-nighters, you don't just bounce back from those in one day. You have to have your normal sleep, and then you have to have another sleep, which is the makeup sleep. So when I say comparable, it's actually like 2 days to recover from an all-nighter. And when you've been working at high levels of productivity while undergoing a lot of trauma, you got a lot of ground to make up. So what I've been doing is that I've been setting myself the lowest possible thresholds, so that I am operating in a place of success instead of feeling like my inability to get writing done is adding to everything that's going on. For context, and we aren't going to get into any of the details. Last year in 2023, I'm calling it the year of 5 deaths, because I lost. There were just a lot. It was a lot, and it has been a very slow process coming out of that. And I'm being extremely gentle with myself. So I do, like, the thing I try to do is 3 sentences a day. And there are days that's not even a doable thing, but it is more manageable than I'm going to write 2,000 words a day. It's like 3 words or three sentences. I have a friend who is coming out of similar quantities of trauma, and her thing was 1 word, that she just had to open the document. And some days she would get 500 words, and some days she would get 8 words, but they were 8 good words. So think of it, be extremely gentle with yourself. Set a goal that's a very small goal, and don't beat yourself up if it's hard to hit it. All right. So, what is the best way as of 2024 to look for agents in your genre, in the best way to get noticed, and to avoid both the slush pile and whatever nightmares AI writing has inflicted upon the system? Okay, those are 2 different things. So the first is, how do you avoid the slush pile? And the second is, what is the chaos of AI? So you don't avoid the slush pile. Generally, it's agents just get a lot of submissions. Yeah. The only ways that I know of to avoid the slush pile are to go to a conference meet an agent and have them tell you to send them something. And even then, it's going to be in a stack with other people that they have said that to, because agents are nice people. And it is easier for them to say, send me something, than it is to crush your hopes right in the moment. Sorry, that's really hard to hear, but I feel like it's safer for your emotions to know that. And then the other piece of that, before we get to the AI thing, the other piece of that is that the way you get them to say that, because they don't actually say that to everybody. They say that to people who seem like fun people, who seem like nice people. So what I find is that the way to do that is to talk to the agent about things that are not your book, until they ask you about your book, and then to have an elevator pitch ready to go. And I recommend going back into our archive and listening to the episode with Michael Underwood on how to hand sell your book, and listen to any of Dongwon Song's episodes about elevator pitches. What are your thoughts, Howard, before we get to the nightmares of AI?
One of my thoughts is I hate the way this camera drops me out of focus, and then
I thought it was my eyes.
It's just the worst. The only way to avoid the slush pile is to have a personal relationship as a shortcut. Fundamentally, yeah, I mean, I know some people who are editors, I know some people who are agents, and if I give them a phone call or an email, it's like I've got one golden ticket. You know, I can dodge the slush pile with that person maybe one time. Building those relationships takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, yeah, attending conferences and being personable and being fun to be around.
Yeah,
is charisma is not your dump stat in this business.
Yes, accurate. And just for context, like when we sold my first novel, I was agented, okay? Agented, I knew the editor that we sold it to, and it still took a year to get an offer. And I had the Astounding Award for Best New Writer as well. So, you know, it just takes a while. And as far as the AI nightmares AI writing has inflicted upon the system, don't use AI to write your query letter, because then it will sound like a robot or just weird. And but that's basically it. Like they're just getting inundated. But as long as you're writing good material and sound like a human, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So this next person has an interesting question. Oops, sorry. This next one has an interesting question. When you're in a critique, how do you know what needs to be added? So the person is saying that they've got all of this stuff. They understand the world, the internal logic of it. And my problem is my POV characters won't know or care about most of this information, but my critique group keeps asking me to explain more. How do you balance this? How do you know something is actually missing instead of fellow writers picking your brain?
Yeah, that's two different questions. How do you know that something is actually missing rather than just your writers wanting to see your world book? I don't have an answer for that question without meeting all your friends. And I don't have time to meet all your friends, so I'm going to give that a wide miss. How do you provide enough information when the characters, your point of view characters, really have no reason to exposit anything? And the answer is add somebody who does. Add a cabbage head. You add someone who needs to have it explained. You add someone who is going to have some of the same questions that your readers will have, and you let them stand in for your readers receiving the answer to those questions. It's a hack, yes. It doesn't mean adding a POV necessarily. It just means making sure that you've got someone on stage who needs to be told how the spaceships have artificial gravity, or how come people live to be 300 years old instead of 75.
I do. I've definitely used Cabbage Head before. The other thing that I do is that I look at whether or I try to make the question go away. Sometimes the answer is not that you need to put more information in. Sometimes you need to pull out the thing that caused them to ask the question.
Mm.
So, for instance, like, let's say that I've got my readers are saying something like, I was really interested in the airship captain. I didn't understand how he got the scar on his face, and like his relationship with the first mate. What was going on with that? And that whole thing with the yellow parcels over by the side. I didn't understand what those were at all. And you're like, set dressing, and the airship captain is supposed to get us from point A to point B. So the answer is take the yellow parcels out. Do we need to know what they are? No. If it's not information, so the way if something is actually missing, the question is this a piece of information that the reader needs in order to finish the story? If it is, then that is something that is missing and you need to explain. If it's not, then you're putting in details that are causing readers, that are distracting readers. So pull those details out. Okay, if you are a beginning writer, at what stage in the process do you hire sensitivity readers? The person has priced them out to read a full manuscript, and there's no way they can afford it unless they sold the novel, but are still super early in career. So there's hiring a sensitivity reader, and there's hiring a sensitivity consultant, and then there's asking someone if they'll talk to you, and then there's doing research. There's a bunch of different ways to handle this. My recommendation is that you actually hire someone to talk to you, a consultant, while you're doing your outline and concept. Because that is the thing that's going to really, really mess with you. If you have something where a concept is baked in to your plot in ways that are going to be, impossible to pull out later. Most of the time when people hire a sensitivity reader, it is to come in and clean up messes after the fact. But if you get them in at the beginning, then you can avoid a lot of those messes. During that conversation, you can say, can you recommend books that I should be reading? Can you talk to me about pitfalls that I need to watch out for as I'm writing this? And then if you sell the book, you can go back and hire them to do another pass, or you can hire them to not read the full manuscript, but just the problem areas that you are specifically concerned about.
Well, and if you sell the book to an editor at a major publishing house, have this conversation with your editor. They may have somebody on tap already. I might be able to say, oh, yes, I was meaning to talk to you about that. I want to pair you up with so-and-so because...
Yeah. Some houses will have sensitivity readers. Others will expect you to hire that as part of the creation process of the book. It depends on the house. But yeah. But basically, hiring them at the beginning is less expensive than hiring them at the end. Okay, I am summarizing this. I prefer YA. And basically, they find that adult age category books, that the conflicts are often petty and more childish than the ones in YA titles. So the question is, if they want to write an adult book, how do they find age appropriate tension and conflict? Well, the first thing is, if you prefer YA, just write YA. Like, if you aren't, if you tend to find adult ones petty and childish, I would note that in the book and not use it as a model. But I'm betting that not all of them hit you that way, or that you have a topic, a theme, something that isn't appropriate for a YA audience, and that is what's making you want to go with an adult audience. So tension and conflict basically come from context and the person. So if you make a character who is not petty and childish, the things that they get tense and have conflicts about will not be petty and childish. It feels very glib, but I do feel like it comes down to that a lot.
It's important to point out that the sorts of problems that a child or a young person might have, other people don't like me. My friend and I had a fight. I'm uncomfortable speaking when everybody's looking at me. I'm struggling to live up to the expectations of my parents. Every last one of those things happens to grown-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason for it to seem childish unless you've couched the conflict in a way where it's obvious that the adult in question isn't putting in the work to actually communicate, to resolve the conflict, or to ask their parents about their expectations or whatever. Adults have a bigger toolbox maybe for resolving some of these conflicts, but ultimately a lot of these boil down to some very basic human things, and young, old, we're all going to have the same sorts of tension.
Yeah. Okay. And I agree with this completely. All right. This is the last one from that we got in ahead of time. Any advice for writing a character who is working from a different perceptual framework in a way that does not confuse or turn off readers? For instance, my first-person protagonist culture, ancient Greece, conceptualizes color in a very different way than the English-speaking world. If you think in terms of hue, value, chroma, English speakers segment out colors based on hue and chroma, while the Greek color names generally refer to value and some abstract quality of shimmeriness. So flat light, light iridescent, flat mid-gray, blue-green, flat dark, iridescent dark, with a few hue-based color names creeping in from dyes and vividly colored objects. But mostly, when my main character is describing environments, he's given descriptions based on the quality of light rather than color, which for English speakers is weird. Also, my protagonist is partially face blind. Do I just hang a lantern on it and have his friends get exasperated when he can't tell that person A is clearly person B's brother or something? For the second part, yeah, hanging a lantern on it is the way to go. For the first part, just describing environments based on the quality of light rather than the color, we would accept that with no problem if you were a full-out alien. So I think one of the things that, if you think of it in that way, one of the tricks that we can use with an alien is that we can use the use the unexpected term, but pair it with something that we can relate to. So, flat iridescent light of the ocean. It's like, oh, I know what that is.
Yeah, the part I'm stumbling over is uh, why this is story important. Because if it is truly story important that we're describing, or actually describing is the wrong word, perceiving the colors in a way that is different than the way readers, the modern reader might perceive the color. Um, we are writing a book that's kind of based on some fascinating historical, is some cool research. If you don't have a word for the color, you can't see the color as well as people who do have a word for it. Neat stuff. If that's the point of the story, then you've got someone in the story who is able to explain that, and they can explain it, and we're good. If that's not the point of the story, you might just need to leave it out because it's going to trip people up without the explainer.
Yeah, even when I'm writing something that is set in the modern world, if I have a character who is viewing things um, like, Elma and the Calculating Stars thinks about things in terms of math a lot. And I don't throw the equations down because my readers would not get it. I think using it some, like I'll throw in some for flavor and texture. So I think using some, but I don't, and I know it's a first person narration, but they would also be thinking in ancient Greek. So but you're writing in English, so it's okay to translate the concepts at the same time that you're translating the language.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and fun question. Uh, and the scale that it's on is kind of, yeah, this would be easy with an alien, and it would be easy if we were writing a character who sees things exactly the way we do. But what you're writing is a character who most of the readers will think should see things exactly the same way we do, but doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's where things get fraught.
One of the things that that the our Patreon supporter just clarified. I want to jump back up to the question about looking for agents. So because they're in the Zoom with us, they just clarified that part of the question is also the mechanics of looking for agents in 2024. Like, is it Publishers Marketplace? Is there, how do you actually find the agent, not just get past the slush pile? And there's the folks in the chat are offering some great off suggestions, like Publishers Marketplace that offers a database where you can look by genre, and that you can do a 1-month subscription for $25 and get back out. Poets and Writers has its own agent database. One of the other tricks that I'm seeing people talk about Query Tracker, Query Manager. One of the other tricks that you can actually use, which is not a trick that costs any money at all, look at the big conferences that are interesting, and then look at the list of agents that they have invited to come and speak at that, because they will all have bios listed on their website. And they will all be people that someone else has vetted as reputable. So you can hop through that, and you can narrow it down by picking conferences that are in your genre. So if you write horror, like, look at who's going to Stoker and things like that. Okay. Howard, do we have any other questions that have popped up in our...
Looking at the chat, the Zoom chat, I think we covered everything. Christina had some additional questions about the.
Thank you. I did actually want to hop back to that one. Yes. So this is the when you're writing historical,
swearing
yes,
in historical
fiction and 100% accurate plot necessary setting detail. So it's not just the swearing. The character occupies a kind of John Oliver role, which is that they use satire to make commentary. The way I handle something like that is that I make them not a one-off, not an isolated example. So if they are all by themselves, they're going to feel like an anachronism. If there's another example of someone else doing a similar thing, like Punch and Judy. Punch and Judy was the Saturday Night Live of its day. It's a puppet show now. Like people are just like, it's puppets, it's Punch and Judy. But at the time they were absolutely cutting edge, talking about the social satire. It's what they were doing. And then the Victorians came along and they made them cut out the politics and put them into the nursery for the children. And then they had to cut out the sex. And so really all that was left was the violence. Point being, there were a lot of examples of Punch and Judy men, Punch and Judy shows. So one of the ways you can make things feel more grounded and real is to have your character see someone else doing that job, not doing it as well, having someone, and that gives you an opportunity for people to talk about what the job is and the role that it occupies in society. And it also doesn't make your character feel like a weird outlier. Because, John Oliver is not the only person doing that. He's just really good at it. Okay. Fantastic. So I see that there are some questions from our YouTube viewers. And we are almost out of time. So I'm going to pick just one of the YouTube questions. And I'm going to pick it slightly at randomly.
Excuse me.
All right. Actually, I'm going to pick one not at random. I'm picking one very deliberately. Horror question.
Favorite.
Yes, I'm picking because it's something I feel like we can answer in 5 minutes. Horror question. Are there any hard and fast rules about creating tension? We have, is it last season or the season before that? We did an entire month on tension.
Yeah.
On the podcast. So there are some, there are no rules, but there are plenty of tools and tricks for creating tension. I found that tension that there's some of the tools that you can use are juxtaposition, which is great in horror, where you juxtapose something really lovely against something terrible that is happening right in the moment. You see this in film where the beautiful music is playing behind a horrific battleground scene. So juxtaposition is a useful thing. Anticipation, again, this is something we see in horror all the time. It's that moment where everybody knows that when they go down the stairs to the basement, the monster is going to jump out at them. And you stretch that moment, causing the reader to anticipate it. And that anticipation builds the tension for the reader. What are some of the ones that you use, Howard, when you're building tension?
I come back to helpless competence. I love competence porn. I love seeing somebody do something really well. I love writing somebody doing something really well. And in horror, one of the key elements, and yes, this is something I got from you a decade ago, you have somebody who does something really well, and it's completely useless in the face of this new crisis. they are an outstanding runner. They're a sprinter, and they're trying to swim away from the monster.
Yeah.
Is a good purely physical example. The tension inherent in, but I'm amazing at thing, why can I not do other thing, is very real and visceral to a point that, I mean, I think we all get it at some point. I can write a novel. Why can I not make a souffle? I can write code. Why can I not slam dunk a basketball? That one's a little more obvious, but yeah, you see where I'm headed. And that, for me, is a really fun piece of tension to build because it also sets up the possible solutions.
Yeah. Fantastic. So thank you all so much for joining us. If you want to join the conversation again, please join patreon.com/writingexcuses. And we would love to have you in the audience with us. We're going to end the stream now and then hop back into our Zoom to chat with the folks who are Patreon supporters. And we thank you all for joining us. See you next month.